Melissa Whitaker appeared to be a grieving mother and heartbroken widow until investigators discovered her daughter Lily had been slowly poisoned and her husband Daniel's suicide was staged. What seemed like a tragic family collapse was, in truth, a chilling plan. Did Melissa poison her own child just to frame her husband for murder and walk away with everything? Melissa Whitaker stood at the edge of Lily's hospital bed, her hands trembling, eyes fixed on the monitors that had just gone still. Just hours before, she had cradled her daughter on the living room couch, trying to calm the sudden shortness of breath and racing heartbeat. Now, inside the sterile emergency room, time seemed to collapse. Doctors moved with urgency, then gradually slowed as they realized they were too late. At 8:42 a.m., 12-year-old Lily Whitaker was declared dead. The attending physician noted complications from a heart condition, though her medical history hadn't previously indicated anything critical. Melissa wept in silence, overwhelmed by grief that, to the staff, appeared genuine. Back home, the house was frozen in the echo of tragedy. A single child's backpack lay untouched by the door, her cereal bowl still on the table, milk curdled. In the summer heat, neighbors gathered outside the fence, murmuring their disbelief. The Whitakers weren't particularly close to anyone, but everyone knew Lily, a bright, quiet girl who sometimes helped her mother in the garden or sold lemonade on warm weekends. Her sudden death stunned the neighborhood, but no one questioned it. People assumed it must have been a medical condition that had gone undiagnosed. That assumption began to unravel when the coroner reviewed the toxicology report. Among the standard tests, a lab technician flagged an unusual concentration of digoxin in Lily's system. The compound is normally used to treat heart failure or arrhythmias, but Lily wasn't on any heart medication. The level found in her blood wasn't a therapeutic dose. It was lethal. At first, it was suspected that the medication had somehow been prescribed in error, or that Lily had accidentally ingested something she shouldn't have. But no prescriptions matched, and the compound wasn't something a child could easily stumble across. It was too specific, too obscure. Detectives from the Tallahassee Police Department were assigned to investigate further, starting with a search of the Whitaker home. What they found deepened the mystery. On the kitchen counter sat a mug, Lily's, unmistakably decorated with cartoon sunflowers. Inside were faint traces of a yellow residue that matched the compound found in her blood. Still, there were no signs of forced entry or disturbance in the home. No recent visitors, no evidence that anyone outside the family had access. The initial shock of a medical tragedy now shifted toward something more sinister. Investigators questioned Melissa and Daniel separately. Both expressed disbelief. Melissa said Lily had been getting sicker for weeks, complaining of stomachaches and fatigue. She had taken her to the doctor twice, but nothing significant had shown up. Daniel echoed the same. He'd been working long hours, but saw no warning signs that something this serious was coming. Then, just 3 days after Lily's death, Daniel Whitaker was found dead inside his car at the edge of Lake Talquin. The engine was off. The driver's window was cracked. A single gunshot wound to the head ended his life. His hands were resting on his lap. The gun was still in his right hand. His wallet sat open on the passenger seat, and his wedding ring had been placed neatly on the dashboard. At first glance, it looked like guilt had driven him to suicide. A father crushed by the loss of his daughter, maybe hiding a secret he couldn't live with. But even in his death, something felt off. No note. No prior signs of mental distress. Coworkers said he'd shown up to work the day before, behaving normally. In fact, one colleague remembered him saying he was going to sort things out at home. Melissa, again consumed by grief, told authorities Daniel hadn't been himself since Lily's passing. She blamed the stress, saying he hadn't spoken much in days. With 2 deaths in 1 week, the community mourned, but the investigators grew more suspicious. The medical examiner ordered a second toxicology screen on Daniel, while forensic teams, went back to the family home. The scene had remained mostly untouched since the previous search. But this time, they dug deeper, reviewing internet searches, receipts, and pharmacy records. And slowly, a new picture began to form. One where tragedy might not have been accidental at all. Detectives now faced a chilling question. Had Lily been murdered? And if so, had Daniel taken his own life out of guilt? Or had someone else orchestrated both deaths, hiding behind the perfect illusion of a grieving family? As the investigation gained momentum, detectives focused on the two unusual deaths that had occurred just days apart. The toxicology report from Daniel Whitaker's autopsy came in, and the findings immediately raised alarms. His body contained only a trace amount of digoxin, far too little to be fatal. But there was something else, evidence of carbon monoxide exposure. Further testing revealed that Daniel had likely been unconscious before the gunshot wound ended his life. It was a disturbing discovery, suggesting that his death may not have been a suicide at all. Forensic teams re-examined Daniel's car. The tailpipe had been carefully stuffed with a dense combination of cloth and tape. It was an improvised method of blocking airflow, causing carbon monoxide to build up inside the vehicle, combined with the faint residue found on the steering wheel and door handles, traces of latex, like from gloves. It became clear someone had staged the scene. The gunshot had been the final piece to make the death appear self-inflicted, but the setup pointed to premeditation. Detectives turned back to the house, searching for connections. On a kitchen shelf, behind a row of rarely used cookbooks, they discovered an amber-colored bottle labeled as a natural supplement for heart health. The label was clean, but when sent to the lab, the contents tested positive for high concentrations of digitalis, a plant-based compound used to produce digoxin. The packaging was common for over-the-counter herbal products, something easily purchased online or at specialty stores. The bottle had Melissa's fingerprints, but none of Daniel's. When asked, Melissa claimed she had bought the supplements for herself, citing stress and fatigue. She said she'd read about the benefits of natural heart support and had taken them occasionally to feel better. She insisted she never gave any to Lily. Investigators noted her calm demeanor, her polished answers, and the way she maintained her composure even when confronted with the findings. If she was grieving, it was buried beneath a layer of control that felt increasingly unnatural. Detectives began to build a timeline of events. Receipts showed Melissa had purchased the supplements 6 weeks before Lily's death. Medical records revealed that around the same time, Lily began experiencing unexplained symptoms, nausea, dizziness, and severe fatigue. Her pediatrician had run tests, but nothing had pointed to a clear diagnosis. The symptoms mirrored those of digoxin poisoning, but they had been too subtle and gradual to raise alarms at the time that a search of Melissa's laptop revealed a concerning digital footprint. Several weeks before Lily's death, she had researched terms like effects of digoxin in children, how long before symptoms show, and natural ways to lower heart rate. In isolation, the searches could be dismissed as curiosity or concern, but when placed alongside the toxicology findings and purchase history, they painted a far more calculated picture. The forensic team also discovered a camera installed inside the hallway near Lily's bedroom, set up to monitor her during sleep. Melissa said it was for safety, in case Lily had a medical episode during the night. However, the footage from the last few days before her death was missing. The SD card had been removed and wiped. Data recovery efforts recovered fragments of files, mostly time-stamped blank screens. But there was a single clip, undated, showing Melissa walking into Lily's room late at night carrying a small mug. Detectives recognized the mug as the same one found in the kitchen with residue of digoxin in it. That piece of evidence, while not conclusive on its own, added another link in the chain of suspicion. The theory forming was grim. Melissa had been slowly poisoning her daughter over time, using the supplement to simulate a mysterious illness. Then, after Lily's death, she had set the stage for Daniel's suicide, possibly to punish him or to cast suspicion away from herself. Motives remained unclear. But investigators turned to finances and relationships, hoping to uncover more. Bank records showed the Whitakers were burdened by debt. Daniel had taken out a life insurance policy less than a year before, $1.5 million, with Melissa as the primary beneficiary. However, the suicide clause in the policy was strict. If Daniel died by suicide within 2 years, the payout would be void. But if he were murdered or died accidentally, the full benefit would go to Melissa. The clues now pointed to a disturbing possibility that Melissa had poisoned her daughter to create emotional and legal leverage, then staged her husband's death to look like suicide. With enough evidence mounting, authorities prepared to move forward, but they knew they would need more, something undeniable, to make an arrest stick. The next step was to uncover the truth hidden inside the family's private life, secrets buried not in the physical evidence, but in emotion, history, and fractured trust. Investigators began digging into the Whitakers' personal lives with new intensity. What looked like a grieving family now appeared to be hiding something far more disturbing. As the evidence of calculated poisoning and a staged suicide piled up, detectives searched for the reason. Why would Melissa poison her own daughter? Why would she frame her husband so meticulously? They started with Melissa's online activity. Her search history wasn't just full of medical inquiries. It was also cluttered with deleted messages from a hidden email account. Cyber forensics recovered hundreds of exchanges between Melissa and a man named Evan Cordell, a name unfamiliar to the investigation until now. Evan was a former boyfriend from college, someone she had reconnected with on a private social media platform nearly a year earlier. Their conversations revealed an emotional and romantic relationship that had quietly reignited. Melissa described Daniel as cold, distant, and controlling. She called her marriage a prison and repeatedly told Evan she wished she could start over. In one message dated 2 months before Lily's death, Melissa wrote, "It feels like we're so close. I just need to push through a little longer. I want to be free of this life." Another message said, "She's getting weaker." He doesn't even notice. That sentence, though vague, sent chills down the spine of the lead investigator. Melissa's financial records painted a similar picture of preparation. In the weeks before her daughter's death, she had applied for multiple credit cards in her name alone and drained a small college savings account that had been set aside for Lily. She had also made inquiries about housing rentals in cities far from Tallahassee, places where no one knew the Whitakers or their past. These weren't the actions of someone blindsided by tragedy. They were the moves of someone planning a departure. The marriage between Melissa and Daniel, once assumed to be stable, was anything but. Neighbors described Daniel as reserved, even aloof, but always attentive to Lily. Melissa, on the other hand, was increasingly distant, often seen in her garden for hours or leaving for long walks with her phone in hand. A closer look at their phone records confirmed the distance. Calls between them had become rare and short. There was no evidence of abuse, but Daniel had consulted a divorce attorney the year before, only to withdraw the inquiry weeks later. According to the attorney's office, Daniel had expressed concerns about child custody and financial strain. He was worried Melissa would make things difficult if he tried to leave. Perhaps that fear wasn't unfounded. Investigators began to suspect that Lily's death wasn't simply about removing a child. It was about control. By portraying herself as the mother of a chronically ill child, Melissa might have hoped to gain sympathy and avoid losing custody if a divorce unfolded. But when Lily died and the cause couldn't be concealed, Daniel may have started asking questions. That would make him a risk. With that possibility in mind, detectives reviewed Daniel's last days carefully. His work computer contained fragments of a draft email never sent. The subject line read, "We need to talk about Melissa." The message body was sparse, just a few lines, one of which read, "I don't think what happened to Lily was natural." The email had been deleted, but data recovery restored the partial file. It was enough to suggest Daniel had begun to suspect the truth. His death now seemed inevitable. If Melissa had realized Daniel was catching on, eliminating him would serve two purposes. It would silence his questions and create the perfect scapegoat. A grieving mother, betrayed by a husband who had supposedly poisoned their child and then killed himself out of guilt, would draw public sympathy. Melissa might have believed she could emerge as the victim, emotionally, financially, and legally. Detectives interviewed Evan Cordell, who appeared stunned when shown what Melissa was suspected of. He admitted to talking about starting a life together, but said he had no idea about any poisoning or insurance money. He agreed to share all their communications and even allowed access to his cloud storage, where Melissa had sent photos and journal entries. One document, titled simply Freedom, read more like a checklist than a diary. It included cryptic bullet points, supplements, ordered, D's schedule, and Lake, quiet on Sundays. The phrase Lake, quiet on Sundays matched the day Daniel had died at Lake Talquin. Every new detail reinforced a disturbing pattern. Melissa hadn't just acted on impulse. She had mapped out a strategy. Slowly, carefully, over months. The full picture was coming into focus. Now, investigators just needed to put the final pieces together before she could vanish and complete her escape. Melissa Whitaker's arrest came quietly on a humid Thursday morning. She was watering her backyard garden, seemingly unbothered by the swirling suspicion around her. Detectives approached her with a warrant, and she was taken into custody without resistance. Her expression remained neutral, almost blank, as she was led into the back of the patrol car. Neighbors watched in silence, stunned to see the woman they had pitted just days earlier now in handcuffs at the station. Melissa refused to speak without a lawyer. Her silence only deepened the mystery. Prosecutors moved quickly, charging her with 2 counts of first-degree murder, one for her daughter Lily and another for her husband Daniel. The evidence, though circumstantial in parts, formed a cohesive and damning narrative. Yet, the prosecution knew they needed more than just motive and suspicion. They needed irrefutable proof of intent and premeditation. The breakthrough came from an unexpected source, Lily's pediatrician. After hearing about Melissa's arrest, she contacted authorities and shared a troubling observation. Months before Lily's death, Melissa had asked if a child with fatigue and nausea might benefit from herbal supplements, particularly those containing digitalis. The doctor had strongly discouraged it, warning that such compounds were dangerous. She never saw Lily again after that appointment. This statement, when paired with the digital searches and pharmacy purchases, solidified the prosecution's case. It confirmed Melissa had been warned, yet had continued using the substance. It showed she was fully aware of the danger, but chose to proceed. Her intent was no longer just implied. It was supported by prior knowledge, another key piece of evidence. Surfaced from a cloud backup tied to Melissa's tablet. A deleted folder labeled Plan B was recovered. Inside were detailed notes on Daniel's routine, specific times he left for work, and the layout of Lake Talquin's nearby entrance points. There were also references to insurance policies and notes about how suicide nullifies payout clauses, details that matched her husband's policy exactly. The gun found in Daniel's hand was traced back to a pawn shop where Melissa had purchased it under a false name 3 months prior. Surveillance footage showed her entering the shop wearing a hat and sunglasses. She had signed paperwork using an alias, but handwriting analysis confirmed the match to her journal entries. She had clearly gone to great lengths to disguise her involvement. Prosecutors now argued that Melissa had enacted a 2-step plan. First, Eliminate her daughter using low doses of digoxin to mimic a worsening illness. Second, once Lily died, stage Daniel's suicide using carbon monoxide and a gunshot to ensure he couldn't defend himself. The hope was that investigators would connect the poison found in Lily's body to Daniel, declare him responsible, and close the case. Melissa had underestimated how closely her actions would be examined. She had erased digital footprints but left behind a pattern. She had chosen a poison traceable in autopsies. She had relied on assumptions that others would overlook timelines and details. But investigators had been meticulous, and slowly, the thread she tried to cut away had begun to knot around her IT trial. The defense painted Melissa as a misunderstood woman trapped in a failing marriage and racked by grief. They argued that she was being scapegoated for two tragic deaths, both of which could be explained without criminal intent. They suggested Daniel may have suffered a breakdown and poisoned Lily without Melissa knowing, then taken his own life in despair. They called her a victim of circumstances, betrayed by her husband and now vilified by the public. But the prosecution dismantled the narrative piece by piece. They presented the journal notes, the gun purchase, the pediatrician's testimony, and the surveillance images. Most damning of all was a voicemail discovered in a deleted file on Melissa's old phone, retrieved during forensic analysis. The message, recorded weeks before Lily's death, was intended for Evan Cordell. In it, Melissa's voice could be heard saying, "Everything is moving forward. It's harder than I thought, but it's almost done." That single sentence silenced the courtroom. The jury deliberated for less than 6 hours. Melissa was found guilty on both counts. She showed no reaction when the verdict was read, her expression unreadable. Sentenced to life in prison without parole, she was let out of the courtroom with the same calm demeanor she had worn when she was first arrested. But beneath that exterior was a woman who had calculated, manipulated, and destroyed everything. In her life in pursuit of an illusion of freedom, no one ever saw her cry. Not during the investigation, not during the trial, not even when the sentence was passed. The only tears shed were by those she left behind. The dust had settled in the courtroom, but for those closest to the Whitaker tragedy, the aftermath had only begun. Melissa's conviction marked the end of a long and haunting investigation. Yet questions still lingered. How could a mother do this? What had driven her to such lengths? In the quiet town of Tallahassee, people spoke of Melissa Whitaker in hushed tones, no longer as the grieving mother or widow, but as the woman who poisoned her own daughter and staged her husband's murder to look like suicide. The media quickly latched onto the sensational story. Headlines branded it the heartbreak killer, and news anchors dissected the trial footage and evidence with dramatic flair. But beyond the news cycle, the deeper story lived in the silence of the empty Whitaker home, in the hollow grief of neighbors who had once waved at Lily on her way to school, and in the irreversible damage left behind. Investigators continued reviewing the case files, looking for signs they might have missed earlier. One troubling detail came from Lily's former teacher, who contacted police after the conviction. She recalled a specific incident a few months before Lily's death. During a class assignment on family, Lily had written a story about a woman who made her family disappear so she could go far away and live with someone she liked more. At the time, it had seemed like an odd but innocent piece of fiction. Now, it seemed like a whisper from a child trying to say something no one knew how to hear. Evan Cordell, the man with whom Melissa had exchanged hundreds of messages, disappeared from public view after the trial. He gave one interview, his only public comment, where he admitted to feeling blindsided and used. He said he had believed Melissa's version of her life, believed her when she said she was trapped, unloved, and ready to escape a cold marriage. He never imagined that escape would come at the cost of 2 lives. Melissa never admitted guilt. From the moment of her arrest to her sentencing, she refused to speak on the record. Her legal team filed one appeal, citing circumstantial evidence and emotional manipulation during the trial. The appeal was denied within months. Melissa was transferred to Lowell Correctional Institution, where she reportedly kept to herself, showing no emotion and declining all interview requests. She became an enigma even in prison, quiet, composed, and unreadable. The life insurance payout Melissa had hoped to receive was legally blocked following her conviction. The funds were placed into a trust for any remaining family members, though there were few left who wanted anything to do with her legacy. Her sister, the one relative who briefly testified at trial, refused to claim any of it and later moved out of state, trying to separate herself from the darkness that had overtaken her family's name in the years that followed. The house on Maple Grove Lane remained vacant. Attempts to sell it failed repeatedly. Some said it was cursed, others just couldn't bear the association. The garden Melissa once tended so meticulously with Lily grew wild and tangled. The bright sunflowers that once bloomed beside the porch decayed and vanished, replaced by thorns and weeds. For those who had known Daniel, the heartbreak was perhaps the hardest to accept. He had died with suspicion hanging over him, and only in death was his innocence revealed. His former co-workers placed a small plaque outside the office building where he had worked, honoring his memory as a good man and a dedicated father. It was a quiet gesture, but it meant something to those who had believed in him even when public opinion briefly turned. The final chapter of the case came 2 years later, when a documentary filmmaker released a feature on the investigation. Titled Behind the Mug, The Whitaker Case, it explored the forensic work that had uncovered the truth, the slow unraveling of Melissa's plan, and the missed signs that might have saved Lily. The mug, Lily's favorite, the one used to deliver the poison, became a haunting symbol of innocence lost. It was sealed in an evidence locker, a quiet but chilling reminder of the fragile line between love and control. The story of Melissa Whitaker did more than shock a town. It forced people to reevaluate how they interpret grief, how they recognize manipulation, and how even the most tragic of stories can be more carefully calculated than they seem. She had almost gotten away with it. She had come dangerously close to rewriting the truth entirely. But in the end, the details, the digital searches, the mug, the camera footage, the silence of a child, and the suspicion of a husband who died, trying to understand the impossible, spoke louder than Melissa ever did. The truth had been buried under layers of deceit, but it refused to stay buried. And that truth, once uncovered, made sure her victims' voices were heard, even if it took their deaths to do it.